All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour. There is an unabated spike in the number of COVID-19 infections and deaths around the world. And while many countries have already begun their vaccination programs, the EU, believe it or not, the EU is struggling due to the slow rollout of the vaccines. And there is frustration amongst the 27-member bloc that is now coming to surface. 450 million people in the EU states have to be vaccinated, and there have been concerns over the shortage of the Pfizer vaccine's supply. And now the European Medicines Agency has granted authorization to the Moderna jab. The European Union has now agreed to purchase about 160 million doses of Moderna, which is actually easier to store and transport in comparison with Pfizer, and is also said to have an efficacy rate of about 94%. While the EU has signed deals to secure more than 2 billion doses from 6 different vaccine manufacturers, the problem lies with the manufacturers being too slow to actually go on and produce them. And countries have also been pretty sluggish in administering those vaccines that have already been produced. On the other hand, Germany has now ordered a separate batch of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. There are concerns that this would actually cut into the EU supplies. Europe is lagging behind other nations like the United States, the United Kingdom and even tiny Israel in terms of vaccinations. The EU began its vaccination program on the 27th of December, but the progress has been very sluggish. While the United States and EU have vaccinated at least about 1 to 2% of their populations respectively, and Israel has vaccinated 16% of its population, Germany has managed to inoculate just about 0.4% of its population. The EU has put all of its eggs in one basket, while the vaccines were still at development stage, and now tensions amidst the member states are surfacing. All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what's actually happening with the vaccine rollout in EU, we are joined in by Lisa Louise, who's joining us live from Paris. So, Lisa, let me begin by asking you this. At this point of time, EU is lagging behind the United States and even the United Kingdom in terms of the number of people that it has been able to vaccinate as a percentage of its population. What's going wrong?
Well, it's a huge logistical challenge, and each country is trying to deal with this in its own way. Mind you, France is doing particularly badly. In the first week after the rollout of the vaccine began, it only vaccinated a few hundred people. In Germany, that figure is now at 350,000 people. Here in France, they've reached now about 20,000. The problem is logistical, as I said. The first vaccine by Pfizer and BioNTech needs to be stored at -70 degrees, and many countries don't really know how to deal with that, or France at least apparently hasn't created the necessary structures to make sure this can be administered and kept at very cold places, really. So countries are struggling with that. Obviously, in Germany, the discussion is a slightly different one. The German officials have been saying that they need more doses of the vaccine. The EU bundled its purchases because it could then negotiate a higher price and also make sure that all the different member states would get access. Germany is one of the more well-off countries and would have gotten a privileged access if it had negotiated on its own. But that's the whole idea of the EU. You do it together, you go through it together, and then you get a better price, and even less well-off countries will get access to the vaccine.
Absolutely, indeed. And this also points towards the problems of coordinating a vaccination drive of 27 different nations of the EU. And it now appears that cracks are appearing in this coordinated effort, where Germany would like to have its own separate inoculation drive. Is that what it now looks like?
Well, Germany is doing what it can to get more jabs, really. They are trying to set up a new factory in Marburg in the center of Germany, where actually I am from, just by chance. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to have 30 million doses, additional doses fabricated there and they're doing to, go the EU route, but also go a separate route. That's a difficult one because Chancellor Angela Merkel, apparently, she doesn't really want to leave the EU behind. But there's lots of discussion. The Germans really ramped up in advance. They created lots of huge vaccination centers. There were 4 or 5 alone in the capital city, Berlin, and they're really getting ready in a military, or they have gotten ready in a military way, and they're ready to go ahead, and they want to go ahead now with the vaccine.
Absolutely indeed. And just before we let you go, what is the situation like in Paris and in larger France, where you're based out of? What's it like in terms of the inoculation drive? Because President Emmanuel Macron has been facing a lot of flack in terms of how he's been able to contain the spread of COVID-19. And now it appears that he's also lagging behind in the vaccination drive in his nation.
Yes, absolutely. One can only wonder what the strategy is here. As I said, in the first week or so, only a few hundred people were vaccinated with the new vaccine. And the government still maintains that that was actually part of the strategy. But you can't really, it's very difficult to understand that, really. People here believe that it is a logistical problem. The government has chosen to put in charge people such as Alain Fischer, who is the man overseeing the whole vaccination procedure. And he admitted in an interview himself that he did not have any clue whatsoever of logistics. And that is basically the main part of, rolling out a vaccine. So it looks like the government hasn't really anticipated this. What's more, France is obviously a very centralized state. And different regions are now saying, and departments, they're saying, we can participate, we can set up our own vaccination centers. And the central government seems to be quite reluctant to let that happen. So it's a mess, really, here in France.
All right, we'll have to leave there. Thank you very much indeed, Lisa Lewis, for joining us from Paris and getting us all those updates then.
Co-presented by Skoda. Simply clever.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.